Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening and welcome to the No Treason Podcast. This is episode 18. Thank you all for joining in lieu of watching the National Football League's Super Bowl. Mentioned in the chat, I think we have comms there because the Patriots had 17 wins this season. So, trust the plan and all that. We are live this evening. Thank you all for joining me. And I see people are starting to show up. We've got our usual suspects, Eleanor, G.A. Nana, Claire Cat. We've got MedBeds Co. just popped in. Therese Anon. Funky Pam. Hello, everybody. Yeah, the NFL is likely scripted. John and Chris were talking about that Saturday. And the degree to which it is scripted is probably a matter of debate, but it's easy to manipulate outcomes with officiating and all of that. And also that drums up the typical sports media kerfuffle following every weekend. Anyway, we are getting a bit of a weather break. We had mid-30s today. Supposed to be getting up into the 50s even this week, which is nice. Been working outside. I've got a covered patio that I've been working on for like the last year and a half, and finally getting some good weather to progress a little further on that. Let's go ahead and get into it. Last week we discussed, hey, there's Jessica Storm. Is this where all the I don't give a F about the Super Bowl people are? That's where a good number of us are. And there's Polymathenon saw this. Welcome, everybody. So last week, we talked about how oaths are meaningless as a means of preventing tyranny in and of themselves. Spooner calls them idle wind. We've gone into that at great depth during the No Treason portion of the show, the first 10 episodes. Oaths' efficacy are, they're only so efficacious as the integrity of the person being sworn. But the context we used them last week was that they are useful in the here and now for notifying those being sworn to what the one doing the swearing is agreeing to be held accountable to. They're useful as a research tool in understanding how it's like a snapshot in history to demonstrate what the interested parties held in such esteem so as to make such an oath. So it's like a no trespassing sign. You go outside the bounds of what we've discussed and you're going to have problems. Think of, a marriage vow or something to that effect. I do believe that when you partake in an oath, that you are putting yourself in a certain measure of accountability before God, but that's his business to hold you to that. But at the very least, it is a way of notifying each party, hey, this is what we're agreeing to. This is what we believe is worth agreeing to. But the actual holding that person or each party it depends on the people involved. And we have certainly dropped the ball, and we should get the ball back to grab another sports analogy. Matt BK showed up. Good to see you, brother. In the context of Spooner's rebuttal against the common claim that juries judging the law itself was a modern invention, which is a claim that you can see throughout modern legal writings. And like I quoted a number of episodes ago, the Wikipedia section on this, that this is just a modern invention. This is not the way it really was. The recorded oaths are part of a battery of evidence that we can appeal to. They're not sufficient on their own, of course, but we can appeal to as we engage in our own pushback against a legal establishment that has assumed for itself all authority and discretion when it comes to matter of law. And this pushback has done everything, the legal establishment's pushback against these concepts. They've done everything they can to redefine trial by jury. Redefinition is their only avenue of attack, really, because the document that this legal institution, this legal establishment claims their authority is built on, the U.S. Constitution, mentions trial by jury explicitly. So they can't very well eliminate the practice altogether. And rather than acknowledging the lack of definition of trial by jury in the Constitution is in itself an acknowledgement of a higher, unredefinable truth, they have seized on the opportunity of a complacent people, a people who very quickly and unfortunately shifted its focus onto elections and away from the palladium of liberty, the trial by jury, as the primary means of holding the government accountable. And this establishment has replaced the essence of trial by jury with its own twisted version, a version which amounts to the exact thing that trial by jury guards against, if used properly. A definition is sort of like an oath. It is meaningless in the absence of a people willing to enforce it. Enforcement is the prerogative of the people, endowed with the natural right to resist tyranny, which is acknowledged by either force of arms or through the jury. And as I went through a while back, Spooner explicitly connects those two concepts as co-equal, but situationally different. Last week, we discussed the worthlessness of the electoral process. And I'd go so far as to say that it's not only worthless and ineffective, but it is the poison pill that is the true means by which the global regime has effected its takeover. I mentioned a while ago that I believe that modern suffrage, modern meaning the last several centuries in context of human history, is the latest and perhaps best invention of these despots. And it is apparent to me that the bulk of the state's focus on elections is one of the greatest reasons we should all relegate it to the trash heap of history. Maybe behind a door that has the Constitution nailed to the front of. Tonight, we will finish up Spooner's sections on oaths, looking at those of the judges and then the king, with the same goal. What did the people back then understand they were being sworn to, and how does that fit into the definition of trial by jury as we've laid out? But first, we have some ads, and first up, we have River Bitcoin. Stack sats with River, the Bitcoin-only platform built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Why River? Zero fee recurring buys. Stack Bitcoin effortlessly, hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly to your preference. 3.5% Bitcoin interest on cash. FDI insured, no minimums, withdraw anytime. Expert US-based support. human help plus private client services for big guys. That's $100,000 plus. Business accounts, boost your balance sheet with Bitcoin and earn 3.5% paid in Bitcoin. Top tier wallet, send, receive, and manage Bitcoin securely. Unmatched security, full reserve custody, multi-sig, cold storage, and proof of reserves. Join the Bitcoin revolution at badlandsmedia.tv/river and earn real returns. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. And currently it's actually 3.3%. I personally use that. I maintain a River Cash account, and it's always fun to see the stats stacking themselves. There we go. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Just having the cash sitting in there, and that's a handy thing to have. Bitcoin is on a bit of a sale right now, if you want to call it that. If you are new to the Bitcoin world, I've talked about it a little bit. Obviously, here at Badlands, G Money is the notorious G. And Sod this says, it's driving me crazy that I can't just ask you questions in real time. Would you consider a call-in episode? That might be interesting. In the meantime, if you haven't joined my Telegram chat, that I'm active enough on my phone that I respond pretty quickly. It's in the link in the description below. It's t.me. In fact, here, I'll put it here right now in the chat. http t.me/the No Treason Podcast. So there's that. Like I said, I am active over there. Anytime someone asks a question, I try to respond pretty quick. But I'd be willing to do a call-in episode. I need to figure out how that all works, and maybe once we get, I don't know, I'll have to think about that as far as timing of something like that. We still have a lot of material to get through. I want to go through this entire essay. I think everything that Spooner brings up is worth talking about, and so it's worth doing that. But you've heard me talk about Bitcoin, and I'm not a market expert. I've never been a financial guru type of a guy. And so it's not active on social media. That's cool. Yeah, like I said, I'll definitely consider strongly doing a call-in show. That'd be fun. But I'm a Bitcoin guy from a philosophical perspective, and it was really I've been buying it for a long time, but it's really, as I mentioned on Onlylands on Friday, going through Spooner's essays and refreshing these concepts. Like I said, I've read these for a lot of years, but really digging deep into them and understanding, especially quotes like "all political power, as it is called, rests on the matter of money," and that the only security a man can have for his liberty is to keep his money in his pocket, and understanding the nature of the global regime and how they have used credit manipulation, monetary policy to effect their takeover of various countries and subversions. I went through the history of the Civil War from Spooner's perspective, and that took me down a rabbit trail of looking into how the British central bank, the City of London, Bank of England, how they had manipulated credit back in the 1830s, and then that started this snowballing effect. They also were manipulating countries in Europe that caused immigration crises, where the 2 decades leading up to the Civil War, you had massive influx of immigrants into the United States, just like we have today. It's the same playbook. And that destabilized the United States, which caused the consolidation of power within the United States from a financial perspective, which made it easier for that central bank to then control everything because it was through fewer channels. And then after the Civil War, they funded the westward expansion by funding the railroads. This is the British banking institutions were doing this through their proxies like JP Morgan. And then every once in a while, they do the same thing they did back in the 1830s, and they would pinch credit, which would cause market collapse, which would cause railroads to go out of business, but the rail was still there. So they got bought up into larger conglomerates. And so then you just start stepping your way through the decades, and you realize that there's a lot of reasons for the First World War, but one of the reasons America probably got wrapped up into it, borrowing from the proverb that says that the borrower is slave to the lender, the British Empire had financed the westward expansion of the United States and basically owned us. And so, yeah, of course you're going to come in here and fight this war with us that you have really no business fighting. So, and then I stopped there, but that same progression just keeps going on and on and on. And so understanding how money works and then understanding how centralization is a key part of the way their system works, Bitcoin just sort of rises to the top as far as its design of being decentralized and really a Spooner perspective honoring system. And so that's when I really started. I would even use the term like radicalized in my perspectives on it, and a lot more aggressive in trying to position myself using something like Bitcoin over a period of time to where I would be more free to make more liberty-minded decisions. So that's not financial advice, but understanding it from an ideological natural law perspective. If you were to design something that was to be the monetary weapon against this centralized monetary power, you would design something like Bitcoin. So I personally use River Bitcoin. And then our next ad is for Trezor. And I also use Trezor because when you buy Bitcoin, it's not your coin or not your key. It's not your coin. So your crypto deserves the ultimate protection, and Trevor delivers just that. Trezor offers a secure and user-friendly solution for managing your digital assets. It delivers on its promise of robust security, providing a crucial layer of protection against online threats and unauthorized access. Since 2014, over 2 million users have trusted Trezor, the world's first hardware wallet, to secure their Bitcoin, Ethereum, and over 9,000 other coins and tokens. With state-of-the-art encryption and offline storage, Trezor keeps your assets safe from hackers, malware, and exchange breaches. Its open source design ensures transparency, while the Trezor Suite app makes managing your portfolio a breeze. Buy, sell, and track with ease. Designed with simplicity in mind, Trezor ensures that even those new to cryptocurrency can navigate its features with ease. With Trezor, you can confidently manage your cryptocurrencies, knowing your digital wealth is protected by industry-leading security protocols. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/Trezor to get your Trezor and safeguard your crypto with confidence. That's badlandsmedia.tv/Trezor. If you are also still new to Bitcoin, and someone in the chat who's not, there's Beth, episode 18, damn, she says. A cold storage wallet, I mentioned the line, not your key, not your coin. If you leave your crypto, your Bitcoin on an exchange, the likelihood of it getting messed with is higher. So the idea is when you buy your Bitcoin, you store it on your own cold storage wallet. And as long as you maintain security over that wallet, as far as like physical security, memorize your 12 or 24 word passcode, then it is very secure. The analogy I've heard that I like is that if you imagine your Bitcoin is like your car in your driveway, a cold storage wallet is like the key fob that is coded, then that is the only thing that will turn on that car. And so that's just an analogy that helped me back in the day. If you are kind of freaking out about the over 50% drop that Bitcoin had recently, there are a number of YouTube channels that I like to turn to. Beth is the one who pointed me toward this guy. I really like the commentary of Ben Cowan into the cryptoverse over on YouTube. And he's not, if you're going there to try to learn and understand about how Bitcoin works, that's not really what that's for. It's more of understanding the shorter term price actions and so on. He's bullish long term, but he recognizes that we're in a bear market, and he's had a lot of takes that have panned out to be accurate over the last number of months, and I've appreciated his commentary over there, which is helpful when you're watching the price plummet and you're like, wait, I thought like Bitcoin's like going to be amazing and just always go up. Well, that's not the way price action usually works. So he's helpful in understanding that. There are other YouTube channels for understanding Bitcoin. Obviously, we have Rug Pull Radio and G Money. He does offer consulting, so you can check him out over there. But if you're more of a DIY researcher, it's Bitcoin Not Crypto is a YouTube channel that I've liked listening to as well. He has a lot of good basic the actual mechanics of how do you go about buying and owning and holding, and a lot of the philosophical understandings of why Bitcoin is the answer. Our last ad for the evening is the scandalous Valentine's Day ad for Soft Disclosure.
The following ad is rated M for mature. Soft Disclosure wants you to get naked this Valentine's Day with limited edition his and her bundles that save you 20% off the individual retail prices. Proprietary oil infusions, grass-finished beef tallow, goat's milk from American goats, locally grown herbs and ingredients. Soft Disclosure is putting America First fruits on your skin.
And for these sexy bundles, we've added an all-new boar's haired beard brush and a solid jade gua sha. And the reason I'm here is because Alpha doesn't know how to say these words.
Gusha. His, hers. We need a moment to calm down. Don't hide your skin. Disclose it. Get naked this Valentine's Day with Soft Disclosure. Head over to softdisclosure.com and save 20% off individual retail prices with our his and hers customizable bundles, and use promo code NAKED to save 15% off the rest of the site. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. Promo code does not apply to bundle discounts.
I'm glad we included the small print voice at the end there. That was great. Lion of Britain, I see you in the chat, and you sent over a link on OnlyLands about a trial by jury win in England. If you with the link you sent me was just kind of, it looked like a generic like news aggregate or something like that, and there wasn't anything specific. So I tried following up on that, but I didn't see exactly what you're referring to. If you have something more specific, drop it in the chat and I'll definitely take a look. But speaking of the chat, before we get back into O's, I want to wrap up tonight talking about the judges and the king. We're going to take a detour. I would have about to say quick, but it's not going to be quick. This is a question from Claire Cat, and she was getting impatient, clearly, to get to the objections chapter that Spooner has. So we're going to go ahead and follow her question and jump ahead this for the first half of the show. And her question is, what if the jury or part of the jury is corrupt and partisan? And this is obviously something I think that is relevant today because people have brought up the issue of the immigrants and Muslims, and that, and they don't share perspectives of natural law and that sort of thing. And this is not specifically the immigrant issue, although that is something that would be touched on in Spooner's Science of Justice article that I mentioned last week. But we obviously have it's hard to analyze some of this stuff in context of modern day, because we have such a bastardized system. She mentioned also the judgment notwithstanding a verdict that happened in Minnesota recently, where the jury actually did convict someone for fraud, and then the jury went against that. And I mean, that's a situation that is, it's evidence of the corruption of our time, where someone should have seen that and recognized that we don't actually have trial by jury. But most people don't think about it in the terms or the depth that we've gone into it so far. But like I said, this is an issue as far as the possibility of a jury being corrupt or partisan, that it is handled in his chapter entitled Objections. And I've got a couple quotes, and they're from that chapter. And there's really, in this question, there's two concerns at play. And yeah, Claire Cat mentioned that the judge overturned the jury verdict and that it was a fraud case, I think, for a number of millions of dollars. And I think it had to do with the Somali, in fact. Yeah, I mean, when a judge is like the judge is overstepping their bounds, and I don't know the ins and outs of the way that what rules they have layered on top of this system to where the judge felt they had that justification, but that is absolutely a bastardization of the way justice is supposed to be handled in this country, because government of, for, and by the people. And if you have the people on a jury convicting someone, there is a process of appeals even within the system that Spooner describes, but it's an appeals process, not just an individual judge saying, I don't agree. That's not their prerogative, but they're going to go ahead and take it. And what are you going to do to stop it? Right. That's their basic attitude. But there are two concerns at play with Claire Cat's question. And well, and these are the concerns that Spooner brings up, and I'll show you here in a quote in just a minute. But the first of the concerns may be the precautions that are taken against injustice being done will actually hinder justice being done. And that's certainly you put on so many safeguards that you can't do anything. And so you end up allowing injustice to continue because you're so afraid of making sure that you don't, render an incorrect verdict. So that's one part of this concern. And then to your question, what if the jury itself cannot be trusted to honorably render justice? So to the first concern, Spooner writes, the very precautions used to prevent injustice being done may often have the effect to prevent justice being done. But are we therefore to take no precautions against injustice? By no means, all will agree. The question then arises, does the trial by jury, as here explained, involve such extreme and unnecessary precautions against injustice as to interpose unnecessary obstacles to the doing of justice? Men of different minds may very likely answer this question differently according as they have more or less confidence in the wisdom and justice of legislators, the integrity and independence of judges, and the intelligence of jurors. This much, however, may be said in favor of these precautions. That is, that the history of the past, as well as our constant present experience, prove how much injustice may and certainly will be done systematically and continually for the want of these precautions. That is, while the law is authoritatively made and expounded by legislators and judges. So in the Anglo-Saxon system, and by virtue of general principles of law and reason, if you recall that line that Spooner used a lot in No Treason, as I mentioned, there was a system of appeals that was used, and it should be used, but the appeal was to another jury, similarly selected by random, not an arbitrary judge who permanently occupied their position, gaining power and influence. Thus, they're subject to bribes, flattery, or vain notions of some type of legacy. I see Lion of Britain has put that link in the chat, and I appreciate that. The nature of the system that Spooner outlines, stripping law down to its most elemental and core nature, implies an elimination of the tedious and burdensome legal process we have all become accustomed to. We talked about this before, that we have no way of knowing how many laws are actually on the books. A lot of cases are people digging through, book after book of precedent and trying to build a case based on nuances of previous rulings. Whereas in each jury, if you're just judging by natural law, you think, again, I mentioned the 5 points of a natural law contract last week. Anybody can figure out, does this person, did they defraud somebody? Was their property damaged? Are there, certain rights that need to be paid and duties and so on? And that's something that is much less burdensome and much less expansive than we're used to today. The possibility of like shenanigans or whatever in a system where the jury itself is the one essentially deciding what the law is, It's less likely, not more likely. And we've seen, certainly with infrastructure and plenty of other things, that complexity of a system lends more towards corruption, not less. So that's certainly one argument against the modern system, is how complex it is. And Spooner has a line I didn't include in here, that the law is something that people should look to as a refuge, whereas how many people see the law as a burden and see a law, see the legal system as this deeply destructive force on their life because of the cost of everything and so on. And that's not the way it should be. And that in and of itself is evidence of the perversion of justice. People who are pushing for more complexity are either idiots for not knowing all of the problems that come with it, and therefore they shouldn't have any influence on the system, or they're evil because that's exactly what they're planning for, and they really shouldn't have any influence. So that is a way that Spooner is arguing in regards to this. Like, you have to have some precautions against injustice, and the simpler system you have ultimately is better. But to the second point, and that is more towards your question, he has in that same, it's under the same topic in his objections chapter. He has this quote here. He says, legislators and judges are necessarily exposed to all the temptations of money, fame, and power to induce them to disregard justice between parties and sell the rights and violate the liberties of the people. Jurors, on the other hand, are exposed to none of these temptations. They are not liable to bribery, for they are unknown to the parties until they come into the jury box. They can rarely gain either fame, power, or money by giving erroneous decisions. Their offices are temporary, and they know that when they shall have executed them, they must return to the people to hold all their own rights in life, subject to the liability of such judgments by their successors, as they themselves have given an example for. That's a longer way of saying, by the standard you judge, it will be judged unto you, as Jesus said, which again goes back to the roots of natural law. The laws of human nature do not permit the supposition that 12 men taken by lot from the mass of the people and acting under such circumstances will all prove dishonest. It is a supposable case that they may not be sufficiently enlightened to know and do their whole duty in all cases whatsoever, but that they should all prove dishonest is not within the range of probability. A jury, therefore, ensures to us what no other court does, that first and indispensable requisite in a judicial tribunal, integrity. So this breaks down into three basic points: the corruptibility of judges by virtue of being known and established, the incorruptibility of jurors by virtue of being unknown and extemporaneous, and the probability of enough corruption in a totally randomly selected jury. And again, if you're interpreting that in light of the way things are done today, it's not apples to apples in that situation, because what we're talking about here is the way the system should be, not necessarily the way the system is. So to the first point, the corruptibility of judges, we don't really need to belabor this because we can all see how this plays out right now. CanCon and Ash were talking on Daily on Wednesday about the promotion of certain men in Georgia to judgeships as likely payback for playing along with the fraud, the election fraud cover-up going on down there, which, as a disclosure op, that should wake up more people to the total illegitimacy of the entire system. The focus of justice or law into the hands of one man or a small group of men clearly invites the temptations we would all like to see eliminated in positions of power. Typically, power attracts people who want it and thus probably shouldn't have it. And then there's also the mentality that, well, if I don't do that, then someone else is going to do it anyway, so I may as well go ahead and do it so that I can reap the benefits. If these people should fear the ultimate judge, because the Bible explicitly describes how much God hates the corruption of justice or weighted scales, etc. You can find any number of proverbs or prophecies in which Isaiah or Jeremiah or any of those guys were describing God's attitude towards the way that justice was being perverted by the leaders in the nation of Israel back at that time. And I don't think that's specific to the nation of Israel. I think that would apply to any culture and any time in any place. And so if you are a person in a position of power and you are knowingly perverting justice for your own personal gain, then I fear for you standing before God. We should all fear standing before God. But obviously with the work of Christ, those who believe in his life, death, and resurrection have nothing to fear. But if you're one of those people who has sidelined your morality, then you've got a lot of trouble coming your way. And of course, the means by which a judicial system can be corrupted is clearly seen in how Spooner describes the difficulty then it is to corrupt a jury. So this leads to the second point, that incorruptibility of jurors by virtue of being unknown and extemporaneous. So jurors are temporary. You don't become a juror and stay a juror. They're judging with the knowledge that how they judge will be known by their community, and then they're going to have to immediately return back and give an account to their neighbors for their actions. And then the same standard that they're using to judge other people will ultimately be used to judge them should they ever come into a situation where they're on the quote unquote wrong end of the law. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they're judging with the knowledge, and this should be part of the courtroom conversations. And this is why it's so tragic what's happening today, because we have plenty of TV shows and movies, dramatizing courtroom scenes and all of that. But imagine those courtroom scenes where the judge's instruction to the jury was not, this is the law and this is what you need to judge by, but rather the standard by which you're judging is going to be used against you someday. So, think long and hard about the way you're doing things. Clarecat says, yeah, but in today's judicial system, the jurors are known in advance. That's a problem. The way that things should be done is it should be a totally random system. And we're also used to court cases dragging out for months or even years at a time. And that's a problem. And I'd be willing to go, say that that's part of the design. She says this makes them vulnerable and susceptible to bribery, leverage, etc. That is a part of the design of the system that allows for that to get in, to allow, drag this out, and they're not just there for a short time. If you look at the way that the Anglo-Saxon system was set up, it was not designed for months-long cases, and we've gotten used to that. And that's just one of those things that, like everything else, we need to push back against in whatever possible ways we can. And I think one of the ways that we do that is when you're on a jury, that you approach it with this mindset, and over time, it's not going to be overnight, but over time, I believe that will eventually shift and change. So the probability. So I was saying that they're judging with the knowledge that, as Jesus said, the standard by which they judge will be used to judge them. So imagine the conversations in a courtroom where the judge's instruction to a jury was, be very careful how you're judging here, because this is going to be the standard used against you. Skeptical says, define quick. I mean, obviously that's a subjective term. The Anglo-Saxon system, they had a number of courts that would meet on a regular basis. They had the hundreds, and they had the baronial courts, they had the tithings, and so on. And depending on the type of case, that your case would go to one or the other, and they would meet like once a month, and they would have a number of cases, and they'd wrap it up rather quickly. If all you're doing then is you're taking the evidence and you're this is someone who's been charged for like a natural law type of type of a crime, because that's the types of crimes that you would find yourself in a court. You've stolen something, you've assaulted someone, you've murdered someone, you've defrauded someone, you've damaged some property. Those are the things that would end up being part of this system, rather than the litany of nonsense laws that we are subjected to. And you don't need as much time to prepare for something like that, and you don't need as much time to adjudicate something like that. But the probability of enough corruption, of there being enough corruption in a totally randomly selected jury, as I've been talking about already, the jury selection process today is an absolute abomination, where you're interviewed and you are selected, and they can stack a jury just based on how you answer certain questionnaires. That's not the way it should be. It's supposed to be random, because going back to the discussion of trial by government versus trial by jury, a trial by jury is trial by country. And the whole point of taking a random sampling of 12 people is that you are essentially getting what is this about what the country would agree to. And so by doing it randomly like that, it'd be like doing a random man on the street interview. Is this person innocent or guilty? With the caveat, of course, that, okay, how you answer, this is going to be used against you. And so there's that aspect of it. EC was here. He's brought this up before. The only time he was impaneled for jury selection, he was excused because he knew what ethanol is. And so that's a good case of actual technical knowledge might have benefited the defendant, or might have benefited the prosecution in that case. And we can't have that. We want to have the people as empty-brained as possible, and that's not what we want. We want people who are bringing their experience of life to the table and understanding what rights they value, and so therefore that is going to inform the way that they adjudicate the situation. Because again, the purpose of the jury, yes, is to find justice in the moment for the specific situation, but ultimately it's providing commentary, and literally the jury is the one who takes the sword and puts it in the hands of the king, in quotes, and says, swing it on that. And that's the way it's supposed to work. So as I mentioned, the jury selection today is an abomination. By being random, and truly random though, there's really no opportunity to massage the jury the way things are done today. Then the odds of unanimous corruption is low. Under the true trial by jury system, all you need is one in order to nullify a bad law, because the standard is the government has to convince 12 people that this is a law that needs to exist, that needs to be enforced. And if they can't convince 12 randomly selected people, that's an indication that it's not a legitimate law. That's why the unanimity is so important. And all this then speaks to the corruption of our present practice, not to the one being proposed. As I mentioned, we are used to long, drawn-out media circus affairs. It's a way they can get ratings. I'm sure that's part of it. There's the careful selection of the juries. There's the careful instructions from the bench. The evidence is curated. The arguments are curated, so that at the end of the day, the jury is sitting there simply as optics, and that's it. Because we don't have trial by jury. We have what they call trial by jury, but it's not trial by jury. Trial by jury is, as everything that we've laid out up to this point, that the judge, the law itself is being judged as well. In certain cases, it's obvious this person murdered this person. That's the accusation. No one needs to debate whether or not murder needs to be a law or not, or there should be a law against that. So then the question is, okay, what evidence do we have? And then they're adjudicating that. But when you're talking about taxes, when you're talking about opening a restaurant without a permit, when you're talking about being a barber without getting a license from the state, stupid things like that we have laws against, that if you had a true trial by jury system, you just go open your restaurant, and people want to come and they want to go check out your kitchen, make sure you're being healthy and the way you prepare your food. Great, go for it. But under today, you wouldn't be able to do that. Whereas in a trial by jury system, if you were being shut down by the health department, you could appeal to a jury to basically tell them to pound sand. The first quote speaks to the probability of injustice being low with trial by jury, but it's not non-existent. So that's part of the problem we have in a fallen world, with mankind being, broken and sinful. You're not going to get perfection. That's not possible this side of paradise. But this system, I think, represents the best answer to the basic fundamental questions of how do we politically interact with one another? How do we economically interact with one another in a way that best leads towards peace? And that's why natural law is so important, because it is the way that God has coded in nature. You act this way, it will lead to peace. You act not this way, it will lead to war or conflict or some other variation of that. And by the way, I'm looking up and this is already going on a long time, but we're going to still finish Oaths out tonight because Burning Bright's not going to be on until 9:00. So we've got plenty of time. But the possibility of appeal does exist in the Anglo-Saxon system, and that's certainly something that can be applied here. And it's not appeal to some established judge who is capable of being bought. It is an appeal to another jury, because it might be that maybe those 12 had something going on and that made them decide a certain way, but the next jury might have a fresher take on things. And so that appeal system does exist. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. And yeah, Jessica, I saw narrative is on at 10 p.m. Eastern instead of 9 p.m. So that's good news. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish out Spooner's sections on the oaths, and we're going to talk about the judges first. So first and foremost, we've already seen mention of the fact that judges or other officers of the court served no other purpose than to advise the jury, not instruct the jury or set guardrails for the jury, except in the administration of their oath. So the judges, the officers of the court, the sheriff, and so on, they would be the ones who would administer the oath, and then they're reminding them, this is what you're swearing to. If there were questions on matters of law, then the person who was elevated to the position of judge or sheriff or other officer of the court, they might have, there's some mention of them, I mentioned this before, there's some mention of them being elected to some degree. There's really no record that I could find of how that was done. But it's not necessary. This all was in existence with a king, and the king would appoint judges. The king or a baron would appoint a judge or a sheriff in a lot of cases, and so their role was simply advisory. It was not to give rulings. It was, and like I said, also they're the ones who are standing there waiting for the jury to hand them the sword, proverbial or literal in a lot of cases. And so I just wanted to remind you of that, because when we're now looking at the oaths that the judges would be made to take on assumption of their office, we can see that they are never sworn to follow the law. And in fact, they're sworn to do almost the exact opposite. And we'll get into that in a minute. Diane Laporte Klump said judges are supposed to look at the Constitution first. If you, I don't know how long you've been listening, but I would highly recommend that you check out the first 10 episodes of this show, because you might reconsider that. I covered the No Treason essay, which is what this show is named in homage to. And Lysander Spooner goes through his very thorough takedown of the Constitution as a document of any authority. So And it's a short blurb on that would be that the judges that you're describing needing to look at the Constitution first, they derive their authority from the Constitution. But if someone were to have brought the Constitution into their court and presented it as a contract, it would be thrown out because it doesn't satisfy even modern notions of a contract. But that's the first 10 episodes of this show, or in the description of the show, you can find a link to that essay, the No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, number 6, and that will enlighten you, hopefully. So, to the oaths of judges, as further proof that this is Spooner, that the legislation of the king, whether enacted with or without the assent and advice of his parliaments, was of no authority unless it were consistent with the common law, and unless juries and judges saw fit to enforce it, it may be mentioned that it is probable that no judge in England was ever sworn to observe the laws enacted either by the king alone or by the king with the advice and assent of Parliament. He uses the word probable, and I think that was him allowing for some measure of information that escaped his, dragnet of research. There is no record of any. There's no record of a judge enforcing the law in a way that we would look at it today. What they were sworn to. He says, indeed, they are virtually sworn not to obey any statutes that are against common right or contrary to the common law or law of the land, but to certify the king thereof, that is, notify him, that his statutes are against the common law, and then proceed to execute the common law, notwithstanding such legislation to the contrary. So judges were actually empowered, and they utilized this, that if a law was decreed, passed down, or whatever, and even the judge himself felt that that law violated the common law, the judge was bound by their oath, literally, to go against that law, which goes back to the discussion of what actually is law. And that's something that Spooner goes into in the Science of Justice essay that I've mentioned a number of times, that law is ultimately something that is discovered, it's not made. And that process of discovery is the way that our judicial system is supposed to work. And one of the arguments that's pushed against that is, well, then that means that nobody knows what the law is. And the simple answer to that is, first of all, you basically know your own motivations, but you can go and do a random survey of 12 people in your community and ask them, would they convict or acquit somebody for the following actions? And if you can find just one person, then you basically know, hey, I'm probably okay to do this thing on my own property or whatever. Let's see, where are we? So slide 5. This is this wording here is derived from the recorded English statute dating back to Edward III in 1346. This was not the origination of these oaths, but it recorded something that was already accepted practice. So it reads, this is the oath that was required of judges, that ye deny no man common right by virtue of the king's letters, nor none other man's, nor for none other cause. And in case any letters come to you contrary to the law, that is the common law, as will be seen in reference to the entire oath given in the notes. That's Spooner's little commentary. That ye do nothing by such letters, but certify the king thereof, and proceed to execute the law, that is the common law, notwithstanding the same letters. So again, this is the king could make a decree, and if it's against common law, if it's against natural law, the judge is bound by oath, literally recorded in English statute, to ignore it. And compare that to what goes on today And the notion of, no one, we have the rule of law. And if by that is meant the litany of nonsense that is passed by illegitimate Congress and illegitimate state representatives, that's not the law. There is a higher law that we can appeal to, that was appealed to at the founding of this country, and that we are essentially bound by oath to adhere to ourselves. Spooner writes, when it is considered that the king was the sole legislative power, and that he exercised this power to a great extent by orders in council and by writs and letters addressed oftentimes to some sheriff or other person, and that his commands, when communicated to his justices or any other person by letters or writs under seal, had as much legal authority as laws promulgated in any other form whatever, it will be seen that this oath of the justices absolutely required that they disregard any legislation that was contrary to common right or the common law, and notify the king that it was contrary to common right or the common law, and then proceed to execute the common law, notwithstanding such legislation. That's a much different. I mean, to some degree, we have that with the Supreme Court, where they say, "Oh, that's not that's an unconstitutional law or whatever." But that process is not reserved solely for the Supreme Court. And the reason it's not reserved solely for the Supreme Court is that ultimately we have a natural right to resist tyranny. So if a law comes down that is against natural law, that is therefore a usurpation, is therefore tyranny, we are not bound to follow that law. Judges are not bound to enforce that law, and instead we refer to the common law or natural law. This is from the statute. First, we have commanded all our justices that they shall from henceforth do equal law and execution of right to all our subjects, rich and poor. So this is from that same statute of Edward III, going back a number of years ago. To all our subjects, rich and poor, without having regard to any person, and without omitting to do right for any letters or commandment which may come to them from us, or from any other, or by any other cause. And if that any letters, writs, or commandments come to the justices, or to other deputed to do law and right according to the usage of the realm, in disturbance of the law, or the execution of the same, or of rights to the parties, the justices and other aforesaid shall proceed and hold their courts and processes where the pleas and matters be depending before them, as if no such letters, writs, or commandments were to come to them, and they shall certify us in our council of such commandments which be contrary to the law, that is, the law of the land or common law, as afore is said. What a different world that is than what we have today. Congress can make whatever law they want, but at the end of the day, we, the people, have to be the ones to enforce that through the jury process. And the justices are sworn and commanded to aid and abet the jury in doing that process. Whereas today, if you step into a courtroom and if you're a defense counsel and your argument is that, hey, jury, you have the right to nullify the law, which is still recognized, but if you say that, you will find yourself on the receiving end of contempt of court and be shut down immediately. This is from 1387, Richard II. It is ordained and established that neither letters of the signet nor of the king's privy seal shall be from henceforth sent in damage or prejudice of the realm, nor in disturbance of the law. How could a king, who is supposedly the law, the way we're taught about how monarchs are, how could the source of the law do anything to disturb the law, except that the law is above the king, and the law is something that exists in and of and by itself, and is not something that can be changed or modified simply at the whims of a would-be despot. The oath of the justices before given is, I presume, this is Spooner, the same that has been administered to judges in England, from the day when it was first prescribed to them, that is 1344, first record we have, until now. I do not find from the English statutes that the oath has ever been changed. The essay on grand juries, before referred to and supposed to have been written by Lord Somers, we went into some of that last week, mentions that this oath as being still administered to judges, that is, in the time of Charles II, more than 300 years after the oath was first ordained. If the oath has never been changed, it follows that judges have not only never been sworn to support any statutes whatever of the king or of parliament, but that for 500 years past, they actually have been sworn to treat as invalid all statutes that were contrary to the common law. And what is common law? It's that which the jury discovers. It's common cultural values. It's simple. It's basic natural law. This will come out if the only cases that are actually brought before a jury are the ones that are connected with basic natural right issues, property damages, murder, theft, fraud, etc. And as I've talked about already, most of our law today is far and above that standard, and people regularly find themselves deprived of liberty and property unjustly. And our answer is just wait for the next election. But that is not a satisfactory answer. The judicial system can and should be not really a branch of the government, but it is a branch of the people, where we tell the government, we're not enforcing that. That goes against natural law. This person has trained themselves in how to cut hair, and you want them to get permission from you to do that? No, they found people who want their hair cut, and they recognize this person is skillful at it. That's all the permission they need, because they own their bodies, they own the scissors, and that person over there is willing to give them money and is willing to sit in a chair and let them cut their hair. That's a small case, but amplify that out to so many different things. Go and try and start a business today and find out how many roadblocks are placed in front of you, and then look at the way the tax system is structured to punish you. If you don't want to be a lemming in some corporation somewhere, you want to go out on your own and follow the American entrepreneurial spirit, you'll find out how brutal they are against you and how expensive it really is. Which this should challenge you too. Whenever you read of some case or hear of something, think about it from these perspectives. Think about it from the standpoint of natural law, and what rights do we actually have over our own property, over our own body, over our own time, over our own resources, and analyze things in that standpoint, from that standpoint, because then you'll realize there's a lot of things that we just sort of accept as oh yeah, they're totally guilty because they broke the law. But wait a minute, the law is wrong in that. And not every case is the law wrong. But Spooner makes the point, and we'll get to that at some point, that if a legislature passes a law that agrees with natural law, it's unnecessary. So what do we even have them for? If they pass a law that goes against natural law, well, that's a usurpation. And what do we even have them for? That's a mindset shift. It's a shifting away from that statism where we feel like the state has to be the one to solve our problems. And at the end of the day, if we truly believe in of, for, and by the people, we won't be statists. You can't be a statist in that regard. A true trial by jury system is absolutely anti-state. Someone has to swing the sword. You can make that argument, and a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They want to delegate that authority. But be careful, because when you place the sword in the hands of someone, you better be sure that they're going to wield that thing properly. And just look through human history and see how well that has worked out for people who just sort of blindly hand it off and say, here you go. That's what's happened in this country. And I've made this argument before, and I'll make it again. I think what happened is we thought that we were good because we had everything written down, and then people went back to sleep, and here we are today. So let's not do that. Let's wake up. All right. So that was covering the issues of the judges. They were never sworn to just take whatever law is handed down and enforce it. They were sworn instead to be not just there, because I said they're advisors to the jury. In that way, they're also advisors back up the chain to the legislator, parliament, to the king, whatever you want to call it. Hey, just to let you know, that's not a good law. And I'm pretty much going to guarantee you that the jury is not going to go along with this. So, just heads up. That's the role that they were essentially being sworn to do. And then by statute, even in under the Norman system, which has so many layers of problems, they still recognize that. And I made that comment last week. I think it's probably because the people themselves weren't replaced. And so the basic cultural values of common law and individual liberty were still vibrant in the early stages of the Norman conquest. And so therefore they realized they probably couldn't just come in and make all the changes they wanted because they'd run into problems. So moving on into section 6, we have the coronation oaths. And so now we see in the oath of the king, which was taken upon coronation, we can see what his responsibilities were. That is what he was pledging to the people to do, which is an interesting concept, by the way, that the king would have to swear to the people. This, again, sort of throws up the notion that the king was this, like, you think of the laws of the Medes and Persians as recorded in scripture, whatever you say, O king, whatever whim that you have. That's not the nature of the king in the early English system. And even later, and certainly later on, the crown, so to speak, is actually the true possessor of power in the English system, which is the City of London, aka Bank of England, aka the centuries-old globalist cabal. So we see that the permission that the king is given is not to be a despot, but rather a guardian of the realm. And he himself is subject to the same law that the people are subject to, and that the people reserved the right to enforce. The king was the wielder of the sword, but he didn't get to decide who the target was. That the legislation of the king was of no authority over a jury is further proved by the oath taken by the kings at their coronation. This oath seems to have been substantially the same from the time of the Saxon kings down to the 17th century, as will be seen from the authorities hereafter given. This oath not only forbids the king to enact any statutes contrary to the common law, but it proves that his statutes could be of no authority over the consciences of a jury, since as has already been sufficiently shown, it was one part of this very common law itself, that is, of the ancient laws, customs, and liberties mentioned in the oath, that juries should judge of all questions that came before them according to their own consciences, independently of the legislation of the king. Melindy showed up in the chat. Howdy from the hospital, catching up. I hope you're doing well. I think you had surgery or something, I remember you mentioning. I hope that went well, and I hope you're recovering well. And Texas Jules with a $10 rant, $5 rant challenge. I gave up on the super boring Super Bowl. I'd rather hang out with my Badlander fam. We'd all rather be here. And it is a good family. And to that point, if you can find time and money to make it to GART, the next one is April 9th through 12th in Nashville. Tickets are available at badlandsmedia.tv/events. If you can't make it in person, the virtual tickets are absolutely worth it. You get access to the Telegram chat and get to watch the panels and, the behind the scenes, the welcome dinner and, cocktail hour, that kind of thing. And it's always a good time. Checking on the chat here. There's Liberty Lion. Welcome. And all right. So this is the form of the oath of the King of England on his coronation. So this is the oath that the king was made to give on the day of his coronation. The Archbishop of Canterbury, to whom of right and custom of the Church of Canterbury, ancient and approved, it pertains to anoint and crown the kings of England, on the day of the coronation of the king and before the king is crowned, shall propound the underwritten questions to the king. So this is the Archbishop of Canterbury speaking. The laws and customs conceded to the English people by the ancient, just, and pious English kings, will you concede and preserve to the same people with the confirmation of an oath, and especially the laws, customs, and liberties conceded to the clergy and people by the illustrious King Edward? And the king shall answer, I do concede, and will preserve them and confirm them by my oath. Here's the Archbishop again. Will you preserve to the Church of God, the clergy, and the people entire peace and harmony in God, according to your powers? And the king shall answer, I will. The Archbishop, in all your judgments, will you cause equal and right justice and discretion to be done in mercy and truth according to your powers? And the king shall answer, I will. Archbishop, do you concede that the just laws and customs which the common people have chosen shall be preserved? And do you promise that they shall be protected by you and strengthened to the honor of God according to your powers? And the king shall answer, I concede and promise. That line, which the common people have chosen. How is that done? That's done in the trial by jury process. And again, oaths are meaningless. Plenty of kings swore this oath and then immediately violated it, which we are well versed in as well. Oaths are meaningless unless the people have that much integrity, like the people, swearing have that much integrity, or the people themselves are jealous of their liberty and jealous of their right to choose the law. Do you concede that the just laws and customs which the common people have chosen? This was the oath that kings in England swore to up until the 1700s or 17th century. Thank you all for the Rumble rants. To see Polymath and Matt have taken up on the challenge. Appreciate that. This is from Robert Kelham's preliminary discourse to the laws of William the Conqueror. He writes, thus stood the laws of England at the entry of William I, that is, William the Conqueror. And it seems plain that the laws, commonly called the laws of Edward the Confessor, and Edward's name was mentioned in the king's coronation oath, were at that time the standing laws of the kingdom and considered the great rule of their rights and liberty. And the English were so zealous for them that they were never satisfied till the said laws were reinforced and mingled, for the most part, with the coronation oath. Accordingly, we find that this great conqueror, that is William, at his coronation on the Christmas day succeeding his victory in 1066, took an oath at the altar of St. Peter, Westminster, in sense and substance the very same that which the Saxon kings used to take at their coronation. And at Barkhamsted, in the 4th year of his reign, in the presence of Lanfranc, Archbishop of Canterbury, for the quieting of the people, he swore that he would inviolably observe the good and approved ancient laws which had been made by the devout and pious kings of England, his ancestors, and chiefly by King Edward. And we are told that the people departed in good humor. But again, oaths are meaningless unless the people hold them to them. Spooner writes, it would appear from the following authorities that since Magna Carta, the form of the coronation oath has been to maintain the law of the land, meaning that the law as embodied in Magna Carta, or perhaps it is more probable that the ancient form has been still observed, but that as its substance and purport were to maintain the law of the land, this latter form of expression has been used, in the instances here cited, from motives of brevity and convenience. This supposition is the more probable from the fact that I find no statute prescribing a change in the form of the oath until 1688. So this was, again, the oath that existed for hundreds of years that the king swore to And the purpose of exploring this is, what was their understanding of the roles of these people who were administrators of justice in England? And what did they understand their rights to be, or their roles to be? Melindy says, needs radiation on my lower back. Well, prayers up for you. Cancer is no fun. Yeah, that's when things like that happen, the info war kind of takes a necessary back burner to life. So I pray that you are able to get that under control. And everyone, if you have a mind to it, I would ask you to pray for Melindy, that she'd be able to recover. This is from a statute, the Confirmatio Cartarium, which is the confirmation of charters. Thank you, Funky Pam, for the $10 rant. So this is, it's 25 Edward, chapter 1 and 2. This is from 1297. And we will that if any judgment be given from henceforth, so this is a statute from Edward. This is the confessor. If any judgment be given from henceforth contrary to the points of the charters aforesaid by the justices or by any other our ministers that hold plea before them against the points of the charters, it shall be undone and holden for naught. This is a strange law that they're speaking of that withstands all attempts to subvert it by parliaments or kings or justices. And the people are being sworn to uphold this higher law. Blackstone, in referring to what this law is that they're actually swearing to, he writes that the laws of Edward the Confessor, by which they usually mean the old common law, was established under our Saxon princes. So this is appealing back to pre-Norman days. Spooner quotes again Lord John Somers, and he recorded this declaration by King James, that is of the King James Bible fame. In 1616, King James said, I was sworn to maintain the law of the land, and therefore had been perjured if I had broken it. God is my judge, I never intended it. The king was sworn to maintain the law of the land. He was not the law of the land. Parliament, then, showing how representative government inevitably perverts everything, because I don't believe that representative government is a good idea at this point. They changed. Spooner talked about how he couldn't find anything up until 1688. In 1688, the coronation oath was changed by an act of parliament, and the king was then made to swear to govern the people of this kingdom of England and the dominions thereto belonging, according to the statutes in Parliament agreed on, and the laws and customs of the same. Well, they're representatives of the people, and so therefore, that's the same thing as when a jury does it. No, it's not. We don't need to go through why elections are fake again, although it's certainly helpful to do so. Spooner's closing thought on this whole topic of oaths. It may here be repeated that this oath plainly proves that the statutes of the king were of no authority over juries if inconsistent with their ideas of right, because it was one part of the common law that juries should try all causes according to their own consciences, any legislation of the king to the contrary notwithstanding. So we see that juries were sworn to judge by their consciences. Judges swore to reject bad laws sent down by the king, and they were to uphold common law instead. And the kings were sworn to maintain the law of the land. The jury is where justice was enforced. And I realized, nope, I did have that up on screen. Good. So the jury is where justice was enforced, and they were to do so regardless of what was handed down from the crown. And then we don't have a position that is entitled king, but we have a de facto king, and it's dispersed among a number of representatives and senators and judges and presidents and so on. But we live in the system that we like to think that we don't live in. And a jury, as I said, that's because that's where the justice is actually enforced. That's where the rubber of the law meets the road of enforcement. And so we have that power due to the natural right to resist tyranny. We have that power to tell them, no, that's not a good law. We're not going to enforce that. Recall the declaration of King John when we were discussing Magna Carta, that a trial by jury made him king in name only. As I've said, the king wields the sword as directed by the jury. He does not get to decide who to wield it against. We like to mock nations that, have a king. Oh, that's dumb. They have a king. But really, apart from semantics, we are no different in substance. And I think the sooner that we take that to heart, the better. Diane Klump says, actually, you might want to go and listen to Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch and find out exactly who the sovereign are. Is there something in particular that he has said that you find compelling? If you want, join my Telegram channel, and I would love to engage with you on some of that. But I appreciate you all for joining me. It was kind of fun to go a lot longer than usual, by almost 20 minutes or so. Thank you to Claire Cat for the question last week that we were able to jump ahead a little bit into the objections chapter. And appreciate you guys sticking around. And although it seemed like maybe the Super Bowl was kind of boring, I don't know. But I haven't really watched it in a long time. So I would have no way of knowing either way. But next week, we are going to cover the rights and duties of jurors in civil suits, which might sound dry and boring, but nestled into every one of these chapters are little nuggets of awesome Spooner isms that I've come to appreciate as he takes. I've talked about the fact that he is, over the course of 40 years of writing, how consistent he was in the way that he presented his ideas and expounded on them and fleshed them out. And so it's fun reading through stuff like this because it's like, oh man, that's so good. So we're going to cover that next week, the rights and duties of jurors in civil suits, as we make our way through the rest of this essay. I have no idea how long this is going to take to get it all done, but I want to get the whole thing done for my own edification. Even just like I've said before, digging into this stuff, it really helps me to solidify it in my mind, and it makes it more than just a passing. Sometimes you see something and it strikes you, but then it doesn't really stick in your mind. And so I've appreciated being able to do this so that it like really takes root in my mind, to where I can then think about it and talk about it in a way that I feel like I kind of know what I'm talking about. So with that, I appreciate everyone for joining me. I will be, next Sunday. I will be live next Sunday. The week after will be recorded. And so I will see you all next week. Stick around in about 35 minutes. Burning Bright will be hopping on the narrative. I believe John Harold is going to join him. And so everyone can go take a bathroom break, get some water, stretch your fingers out, do that so that you can hop in the chat and give them the old-fashioned No Treason Podcast harassment. So see y'all guys all next week. And let me find my outro here. Wrong one.
Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.